What is up, everyone? Welcome back, bass fishing. I feel like February is the kickoff to the season. Just getting back from the first tournament of the season, actually ended up 5th place. So I apologize for the late post on the top baits of the month, but I do want some time. Now that we sort of see the weather trends for like the next bit, I can give you a better understanding of what I think is going to be the best for this month of February. Now, for my friends up north, I know you probably are all still up on ice. You guys are still like fiending. Bass fishing is at least back down here in the south, and fish are actually, even in some places like Texas, are starting to move up and potentially even spawn. Florida, here next week, we have to head to Harris Chain. And that's sort of the anomaly. Like, I feel like Florida is like the one place in the country that is so unique in the standpoint of like, it's typically a month ahead. Hot dang. Gotta chill out with the hand movements, all right? You gotta chill out. I do think that Florida is the place that's normally a month ahead of everywhere else in the South. So that being said, I'm looking forward to the next tournament, but we're gonna dive into what I think is the best baits for the month of February. Hey, it looks like Old Man Winters is letting up a little bit. It happened last year like this. Let's hope that spring is sprung a little bit. It seems like it's warming up even in the Midwest. Cross our fingers. We can only hope. So first off, let's talk about a bait that was really big even last week, and that is a lipless crankbait. I think that especially when you have a warmer month of February or you have grass in your lake, you have to have a lipless tied on. A lipless is always great in that 1 to 3 foot of water. I really like fishing it in grass and ripping it out of grass. Or, you know, for me, it's a lot of just being able to make casts and be able to fish gravel places or gravel places like little points and pushes. Typically, you want a little stained water if you are fishing in like places that don't have grass, because you want those fish to get pushed up there a little bit, and you want bait present. Like a lot of times when I'm fishing a lipless crankbait and there's not grass around, I really want bait fish to be present, similar to like fishing out deep. You want to see the little flickering in the back of the pocket, because typically there's groups of bass moving in and out of those areas, and they'll sit on some of those gravel places and you can catch them. The one thing that I will tell you about a lipless crankbait, I personally recommend changing up your retrieve. The whole key is making casts with this bait. And you cast it out there, it hits the bottom, you wind it, and if you wind it in and there's no, you don't change your rod and your cadence, a lot of times you don't get as many bites. The best lipless crankbait fisherman I've ever fished with, like my buddy Seth's really good, Red Fox, all the guys who really catch them on a lipless crankbait, they let that bait move, they let it drop, they pop it around, they stop it, they reel it, they change their cadence up, which typically generates the bite. So I have 2 lipless crankbaits here right now. This is an old Arashi that I've caught a lot of bass on over the years, and then like an old school Excalibur XR50. One thing that you will notice when you're like really trying to find the lipless crankbait for you. So on a lipless crankbait, the lip, like how basically wide your lip is how hard the bait's gonna hit. So this Arashi has a little bit, thinner diameter body and thinner diameter like nose. That nose is basically what a lip is to a crankbait. So that nose right there being not so wide allows for to have a more subtle action. So where this bait has a little bit wider nose, and that bait has a little bit harder hitting action. So if you want more subtle, a little bit thinner nose, a little thicker nose, a little wider nose, if you're wanting a little bit more harder hitting action. So I do recommend in a little bit cleaner water, I try to go more subtle. And so that is definitely an important part to catching fish on a lipless, but there's advantages to both. As far as rod and reel and line, okay, I'm a big fan of a 6-to-1, 6-8-to-1 gear ratio. This is a 6-8-to-1 gear ratio, one of my old reels. 6-to-1 gear ratio with a lipless, because I think it makes you slow down. I had a problem always growing up of fishing too fast, so I have to slow myself down, and the gear ratio lets me do that. If you're MDJ just said he really likes throwing it with an 8-to-1. But for me, like, it helps me slow my retrieve down and gets that bait down there, ticking the bottom, and I feel like I catch more fish because of that. As far as rod setup, 7.4 medium heavy. This rod is seriously the best lipless crankbait rod I've ever thrown. It really is. And it's one that I worked with Duckett on. And this is the Select Series rod. It's a higher price point rod, but it's an unbelievable chatterbait / lipless crankbait rod. My last tournament, I fished a lipless. I never lost one on it. It's just a really good rod. It loads up really nice. And so if you're looking for like a specialty rod for this technique or a chatterbait, check this one out because it definitely does the job phenomenal. So that is sort of like my mindset. First off, like you think, okay, what's sort of happening, let's sort of jump into the lake of choice this week. And that is going to be Lake Hartwell, home of one of the coldest classics on record. I think it was the first classic I ever fished was on Lake Hartwell. It was like 8 degrees. It was the one Casey Ashley won. So at takeoff the first day, cold tournament. But Lake Hartwell's a great fishery, and so it doesn't have grass. So we're going to talk a little bit about like where am I going to throw this lipless crankbait at, right? So where I'm going to go, of course, I'm going to sort of slide up the lake, the back of Beaver Dam Creek. That's a flat creek. So these little subtle pushes in subtle places I'm going to show you is like sort of the kind of stuff that I look at. So Beaver Dam Creek, actually, to give you guys a little bit of backstory, I remember an FLW tournament here that they caught him, they killed him in the back of Beaver Dam Creek on a lipless. I think Jason Christie won an FLW tournament here a long time ago. But any little like neck downs, like you'll see like right here, here's a big bay right here, okay? So I would say like maybe this point right in this zone would be a major player where that's necks down right there. The bait's got to funnel through this little ditch right here, and this point right here is it would be a great place, a stopping point for those fish to set up. You know, you might want to, you're going to have to figure out if they're in 3 to 5 foot of water, but that's a little bit more of a broader area where a big group of fish can get. Now, if I'm looking for something more obvious and a little bit easier to dissect, it'll probably be something, let me see here, along the lines of this little nub right here. You see how this point comes out? It extends out. There's a nice sharp little nub that comes out, so it's going to tell me it's hard bottom. And on that C map right there, and that is exactly what I'm looking for. Something like that would be a great place to make 10 or 12 casts or roll up and fish around it, and you might be able to find a group of fish that's sitting there, or just a few fish that are sort of meandering around in that area. Typically, stained water is the key, but that is the kind of stuff, you know, and even in the backs of these places where it flattens out, so if I go to this other arm, sort of the back here, it doesn't really show it super well, but you could have already, I'm going to start on this side. On this side, so see how it sort of has these contours get close together here and they push out right there? That might be a good little zone where it's like a little subtle turn or subtle push of some gravel. That's the kind of stuff that I'm looking for if I'm fishing lakes that do not have grass. But in the contrary, it's the same when you're looking for places, that lakes that do have grass. You're looking for those little pushes of grass that come out, extend out a little bit more, and so on and so forth. The only difference is you're looking for gravel on the lakes that don't have grass versus the grass lakes that are, you know, a little bit easier to side imaging and figure it out. So that is sort of that's my mindset with a lipless. I know a lot of people yo-yo lipless and stuff like that, but for me, this is the best way to generate bites, and especially in the month of February when you have some warmer days and the nights aren't getting so cold, the fish and the bait fish push in shallower. And the first group of bass typically are in those major creeks. You got to pick up a lipless. Now, colors, you can go with 7 different colors, but typically your reds, of course, the stained water, your whites, if I'm imitating a shad, your translucent colors like I had right there. I had like a brown craw. That was more of like if the water's a little bit too clean for like a red craw. So just you have to play it by ear depending on what the fish are eating. Obviously, if there's a lot of bait present, I might switch it up and throw a white or a translucent shad pattern. So that's sort of my mindset on the first one, but I wanted to get that out of the way because it is a number one. It's a high player in the month of February, and you have to have a lipless crankbait tied on. Just don't miss out on that opportunity. So number 2 is going to be, of course, you guys have to have it. I said this. I've already said this in the last video. You got to have a Mooch minnow and a freeloader tied on. I'm not going to go super in-depth on this. If you want to go back to some of my previous videos, I talk about this pretty in-depth, and there's some videos that I talk about the value of a Mooch minnow. I actually talked really in-depth on the Mooch minnow. The Mooch minnow just came out. Custody Mooch minnow, smaller profile. Freeloader's a little bit bigger profile. These two right here, it's a 1-2 punch. If the water's dirtier or if they're on bigger bait, I'm looking at utilizing the freeloader on a jig head. That's awesome. You're shaking that bait, and you're really basically, the key with this bait is it has a bigger presence, so you're able to get a little bit more out of that, and you're going to have a little bit more rock. And those fish really come up and just will grab it. You know, a lot of times with utilizing forward-facing sonar or not using forward-facing sonar, it's just a bait that absolutely gets bites. And if the water's even cleaner, even those places that I'm throwing a lipless crankbait, I'll throw this bait out there and working on those gravel places. It's the same thing. Don't lock in and don't buy into this whole thing that you have to have forward-facing sonar, you have to be able to see your bait to catch them on a jig head minnow. That's not true. So just understand, the one jig head that's helped me a lot to get a lot more out of my bait and a lot more fish out of a single bait is that hybrid swim bait jig head. These, I'll make sure to drop the link in the description below. Check out all this. Like, we try to give you guys a good link of what we're talking about in the description. So it's something that we're trying to get a little bit more dialed in this year. It's a work in progress, you know, it just takes time. But we're really wanting to give you guys a lot of the goods and the information where you can go on those links, you can go to Academy, check them out, and you know exactly what I'm talking about, so you're not getting maybe the wrong thing, or you're like, what did he say? You know, so check out the description for that deal. I typically go 10-pound line on a lot of my minnows. So 10-pound Suffix Advanced Fluorocarbon, the 8-pound REVOLVE braid. This is a brand new like forward-facing sonar braid. I'm really big on a thinner diameter braid. So if you're trying to get into like the minnow game, 8-pound line. I know it sounds crazy. I've caught 10-pounders on it. Well, I don't know about 10-pounders. I've caught 8-pounders on it. I've caught tons of big, giant, smallmouth on it. I've caught it. It's just smaller diameter line allows your bait to act more freely. You can get way more bites on it. Just trust me, when you go to 8, oh, it's just, there's something about it, and that REVOLVE is awesome line for that. As far as the Mooch minnow goes, he's a little bit smaller profile. This is a new tungsten head. They will be out and available here very soon from VMC. It's a 3/16. The one thing you're gonna get with the Mooch minnow is he is a really good jig head for, or he's a really good profile for a threadfin shad. Right, so if your fish are eating smaller profile bait fish, which is still a lot of times the key, that's a great profile that I want to throw. So the cleaner the water, a lot of times, I'm going to go a little bit downsize. Even if I'm around some big fish, I'm going to downsize my bait a little bit, the presence of it, because they can see it from so far away. I mean, like say Dale Hollow or some of the Highland reservoirs like Lanier, they can see it from so far away that like a bigger present bait, like a bait that has a little bit more presence to it, like sometimes spooks them a little bit. So like sometimes that little subtle bait allows them to go up there and they just go up there and grab it. You know, it's just a real subtle, easy going. So this head right here, the VMC head, is awesome. They're coming out here real soon in Academy, but I'm not going to go super far in depth on this. I will tell you that I'm in, like the rod, as far as rod goes, 610 medium light. I designed a 2.0 rod. Really important as far as whether you get that rod or not. Just more so, just know, smaller profile bait, you need a little bit lighter tip and a lighter action rod to handle that. So I prefer, that's why I designed that rod, because a lot of the baits I'm starting to throw, like a Mooch minnow, or I'm throwing a Freeloader on an 1/8 ounce head, I don't have as much weight as I used to have, and I'm really allowed to have more tip with more with some backbone back in the very back. So that's really important when you're casting that bait. It gets it out there a little bit further, and when the fish bites it, you don't want to set the hook right at the first time you feel them. It loads up, helps you get better hookup ratios. It's not like a, set the hook real quick. Like, they're not letting it go. Calm down. Calm down. Take your time. Zip. You got them. You're good to go. Get them in the boat. No problem. No questions asked. So that's what I recommend. The other thing that I will say, do not sleep on the Mooch minnow on just reeling this bait. So this is also sort of like a hybrid between a minnow and a swim bait. So that tail back there kicks really well. So what I'll do is I'll even cast this in some of those backs of those creeks and places where the water's a little clear. Cast it out there. I'll give it a little pop. Just get that little tail moving real good. Give him a little pop. Start reeling him. And just that little tail's kicking him just like that. So in clear water, if you're looking for a different presentation, that's a good way to use the Mooch minnow as well. You don't have to shake it like you see all the minnows shaking. Sometimes you just reel that thing and catch them. So that's a good way to do it. So that's enough on the minnow game. You guys know plenty about that, or you've heard me talk about it plenty, but it is something you have to talk about. I feel like I do a disservice to you all if I didn't bring that up, because February is pretty awesome month to be able to bring out a minnow and bring out a Mooch minnow and bring out a ding Freeloader. So I don't want to get you guys all messed up on that. Next in the lineup, I'm going to talk about crankbaits, and I have 3 different crankbaits in this lineup. Shallow crankbaits, sort of a combination of them all. So I gave you guys 3 different options to choose from, so that way I could talk about maybe, well, hold on, time out. Before we do that, time out. I do have to show you guys where I'm going to focus some of that minnow techniques. Real quick here, we're going to jump over back to Hartwell. So time out, let's slide back over to Hartwell. And typically you hear the word ditches. In ditches, this is the key for the month of February for a lot of these fish. So little neck downs. Okay, let me show you like right here. All right, here's a creek right here. Perfect creek. This is, I don't even know what the creek that is. Let's go over here. Okay, so here's Little Beaver Dam Creek. I'll just say that. So you have the mouth of Little Beaver Dam, there's going to be a lot of bait. Let's see this thing. So where next down, there's going to be a lot of bait in these areas right in here towards the creek channel. So figuring out where the bait is going to be key if you're trying to fish for suspended fish with that, with the Mooch minnow or a freeloader. So looking out in the middle of the creek channels is going to be a key to finding. You need to find bait fish to typically find the bass. Okay, so that's what I would recommend, looking in some of these larger creek arms, in the creek channels and the turns and stuff like that. If you're trying to find them in the actual ditches or in the drains, looking in some of these creek arms and these drains, like where it goes up to 20 feet, like right in this zone, like right here, or even like right here, and where these creek gets a little steeper right there. Those are the places I'm going to look that are more main lake. It's not going to have as much bait as much. I'm not going to be like really fishing around the bait fish as much, but there's going to be fish that are going to be starting to push into those drains, looking for, eating in the mornings and stuff like that. So that's sort of like the look, what I'm going to do on a highland reservoir. On a shallower water reservoir, I can still look in the backs of those creeks and the flats and some of those places and even shallower water and catch the fish on that. So I wanted to make sure that I gave you guys a little bit of an understanding of where I was fishing that bait. So that way, I want to make sure I give you all the good. So back to what I was saying with the crankbait side of things. So we have 3 different crankbaits. I have 3 different kinds of profiles, and that was a really important part of this. What crankbait do you throw this time of year? So first off, water's clear, or the water is, or there's more pressure on your legs, I'm going to recommend a flat side crankbait, because I just feel like you just get more bites on him. Okay, so this is an OG Tiny. You guys heard me talk about it. This is the rod I've had. All these rods are rigged up from the last tournament. So they're literally were in my boat. I just pulled them out, and you're seeing exactly what I had tied on for the tournament. This bait right here just runs about 3 feet deep. So if you're trying to get down there a little bit deeper, he's not going to be the bait for you. 3.5, maybe on a cast, maybe 4, but you're not getting any deeper than probably 4 feet with a tiny. So that's the one thing. But shallow cranking, if the fish are a little bit fickle, or they're weird, or they might not be biting your lipless crankbait on that gravel spot, picking up a flat side or cranking down those banks, and they're setting up a little shallower on gravel little banks, that is a killer this time of year. Wind is typically your friend. You're looking for little pushes, little places where those fish could pull up there, cast it down this bank, little transition places. That's what I'm looking for, and that's where a flat side really shines, where it's a little bit more subtle. Now, could I use a shatter up? I talked about a shatter up last time. A shatter up does dive a little bit deeper, so he can get down that number 5 shatter up and get down there a little deeper. For Tiny, you can put bigger hooks on him. He's already got short shank number 6s on him, ready to roll hybrids. So, but ROOTBEER is like one of my favorite colors. So that's really the advantage of a smaller flat side, is he just is more subtle, and it just generates bites when a lot of baits won't. Okay, so that is sort of my mindset on that. Then you jump into a square bill. Okay, a square bill is a great bait for the month of February as well. Typically, for me, a square bill is more of like when the water's more stained, or I feel like it's a little bit more aggressive. So if I feel like the fish are coming in, the water's warming up, I really start to transition to a square bill when that water temperature hits into like the mid 50s. Mid 50s is really like the time like where I feel like these fish are starting to push up, and they're aggressive. They want a harder thump, they want a harder return, and or I'm fishing a lot of wood. So if I'm fishing around a lot of laydowns and stuff, I want to pick up that square bill because I can cast this bait better, or docks, because I can cast a square bill better than I can a small flat side, no matter which brand you're throwing. So that's where my mindset is there. Like, it's going to sort of take advantage of being able to cast it better, getting around those places. It's going to go about the 4 to 5 foot zone. This is a OG Rocco, and like a more of that like middle size, like a 0.5 size, which is like 0.5, which is like 1.5 size. But it gives you a little bit easier casting ability, and it's good for that like 5 foot zone. A little bit flatter stuff. You could throw a square bill around grass as well if you want to rip it out of the grass. It takes a little time, but that is something that I do recommend having a square bill tied on for this time of year. And then last but not least, you could not go wrong with the OG. Well, this is not an OG, but this is the OG of the crankbaits for the Rapala aspect of things that I really obviously love. This bait is a DT6. A DT6 is really more so for bridges. It's steeper banks. I can get a DT6 down there in that 7-8 foot zone. So all of these baits I'm going to have in my boat rigged up for the month of February, and depending on the bank type that I'm fishing or how deep the water is, that's how I'm going to decide which crankbait I'm going to throw. So that's sort of the mindset behind that. This is a DT6. It's got a piece of my glove right there from the last tournament. I went in there and grabbed another bait and freaking got me. The red lines don't play. I do swap my hooks out. Okay, I will say that. I'll put a link in the description below. I swapped my hooks out to number 6 red lines on the back of a DT6. Especially this time of year, these are super, super sharp hooks. Now the hooks that come with them, they're good, but these hooks are simply like the best I've ever thrown on the back of a crankbait. And if they're slapping your crankbait, you really want, and you don't want to lose, you want to make sure every single fish counts and matters, especially in the scenario where I'm fishing a tournament and every fish does count over a certain weight. Like obviously I want to have the best setup, and this is the best setup that I found for a DT6 in generating bites and getting the fish in the boat. So that is him. This is Mule. You guys can change the color of exactly what color you guys think. Depending, I got root beer, mule, red craw, a lot of craw colors I have on my crankbaits right now. But don't like think you have to go with just craw. Shad patterns work really, really well. As far as rod reel line, all of these rods, so on the flat side, I'm throwing 10 pound. On this rod right here, it's my 7.2 cranking rod 2.0. I'm throwing a 12 pound Suffix advanced fluorocarbon, and then on the square bill, this is the select rod. It's the 7.3 medium. It's like a little bit heavier rod, cranking rod. I'm throwing 14. So different in line sizes because I'm trying to get the most depth out of it. Each rod's different, but if you're looking for one all-around good like line size, 12 pound is what I typically go with day in and day out. And do you have to throw fluorocarbon? No, you do not. But it's just personally what I like. It's what I'm getting used to, and I got a lot of confidence in the Suffix Advanced Fluorocarbon, so it works really well. And for that, I'm gonna put these rods down, and we're gonna talk about sort of where I'm gonna fish these baits, and give you guys. So let's sort of slide back in some of these creeks. So like typically you do want a little bit more stained water for like cranking like a square bill on a flat side. So flat side, you know, I'm probably gonna look at fishing like these little places, like it's right out here past this bridge on these flatter banks, a flat side where the transitions from a little bit flatter point to a little steeper. This is probably, I've fished there before actually. It's not a real steep bank, but it's a little gravelly place. So you have gravel point right here, and then it goes and transitions into more of that, like a little steeper, like 45-degree bank. Not super steep, like a, you know, but it's a good bank type. So I'm looking for those little transitions. And that's the same stuff that I'm going to use a square bill for. If they're set up shallower and I need that, if I want more thump, I'm going to use that square bill. If I want less thump, I'm going to use that flat side. And then more so for the DT6 right here, of course, these bridges right here, the corners of the bridges, like even like right here, you have like a outside, I actually caught a big one here one time. I did, I ain't gonna lie. On the outside of this bend right here, where that channel comes in, it's like a steep wall. So you have a steep little wall that pads up right there. I'm gonna crank that, and so with a DT6, I can really get parallel to that bluff, and I can crank it down through there and make that cast. I'm gonna make several casts. So the key is if you feel like you're hitting bottom, or you get a couple good casts, like where you hit the rocks the right way, make several casts on that cast. Don't just cast one, because not every cast with crankbait is great. It's like when you have that, like, so say like a flat side, and I make a cast, I'm bumping bottom really good on the side of a point, and I'm like bumping it really nice, and it feels good. I'm making several casts around that, like maybe like combing that little 25-foot zone, because you know, I can feel a chunk rock, and then it comes off clean. That's the kind of stuff that, like with cranking, sometimes taking your time when you get into those zones and it feels good, like you feel that bottom, that's a big key in generating bites. So that's sort of a good representation. Steeper stuff, DT6, flatter stuff, or the water's warming up, you know, you could throw the flat side or the square bill. So that's good for this side of it. Jumping into the next bait in the month of February, it's one that I have not, this rig I've not had on the channel. It's something that I'm playing with a little bit, something that I really wanted to play with before I really, you know a little bit about it. And I'm still playing with it more and more, and that is a free rig. So VMC makes these, there's a lot of different companies out there that make, but this is a VMC 5/16. It's like drop shot weight. They have it where you can just basically slide it on your line. And a free rig, the key with a free rig is it allows for that bait to have a lot more freedom, and that bait has a lot more freedom away from the weight. So it gets you more of a vertical presentation. So say, like I have a 5/16 on here right now, I would recommend probably a 3/8 when I'm pitching and flipping around. But so if I'm fishing dock poles or like seawalls or places like, or bluffs, I like having that free rig, in a lot of ways when I'm pitching it up to those places and letting that bait fall directly down, but it slows my presentation down a little bit, especially when the water's a little cooler, because I feel as if with that, it allows that bait to sort of fall down real natural. You know what I'm saying? And then sort of when it hits the bottom, it's not connected. So like your question, probably a lot of people's questions, like why is it better than a regular Texas rig that's not pegged? Well, it slides a lot more. Okay, so it has a lot more freedom to slide. So a lot of times, like, so say this, I say I'm pitched to a dock pole, and the dock pole's right here, and it hits, and this weight might slide down my line 3 feet, and then as that bait sort of falls, it sort of just sits there and it sort of just meanders on down. That fish is falling. If he's up high, a lot of times in the water column, if they're up high in the water column, when they see it on the dock pole, they could go down and swim to it, right? So now what's happening is my bait's up higher. It didn't go straight to the bottom real quick, race down. If that fish is being a little lethargic or it's sort of now meandering down, right? And they go down to it and they look at it and grab and just swim off because it's super natural. So that's like a lot of times where I like that free rig. Now I'm still learning scenarios of when I like it and when I don't. So actually, like, would love to hear some anglers out there. If you use the free rig, what have you seen that it's really good with? I've really used it with a Bronco bug because I like a gliding bait. So a Bronco bug has a good kicking action when it's pulling it down, but then it also glides really well. And the cool thing about a Bronco bug is he's got a lot of weight to him. So I can pitch him really easy, even if I want to throw like an 8 or 3/16 ounce free rig. I can do that really easy with a Bronco, and he's just going to sort of glide around. And that's really, like, for me, a big deal of having enough weight to take a 7.3 heavy, like what I have right here at 2.0 rod, and be able to pitch it around little places and still have enough weight. You know, a lot of baits are pretty light. Like, I can't do it with all the baits out there with a lighter weight. But with this bait, it's really easy to pitch around and get to where I need it to be. So I do recommend, if you're going to use the Bronco bug, I recommend a 4/0 straight shank hook. This is a 4/0 red line hook. That's sort of what I have had the most luck with. I feel like it goes through that plastic really well and hooks the fish really well. EWGs work really well as well. It does work pretty solid, but I really like a straight shank. So for me, that red line works really well. And as far as rod reel line, I'm throwing 17 on this, 14 if I'm a little bit lighter, 7.3 to 8.3 to 1 gear ratio when I'm pitching around. I just like that, so if when the fish bites it, I can catch back up to the fish and set the hook. 7.3 heavy is what I have on this rod right here. It's sort of just my pitching around, flipping around rod. And that's sort of the rundown. So 17 pound Suffix Advance, 14 if you're wanting a little bit lighter. Free rig. Drop a comment below. Let me know if you use a free rig. Let me know your setup. I'm always trying to learn. Like, listen, this is what I love about bass fishing. And it's also what I love about doing these videos, because I do actually learn from some of the comments. It's a little bit crazy right now. I try to do a lot of my comments in the off season and try to, like, make sure I'm replying back to a lot of you all. During the season, it gets a little hectic. So I apologize. And during the season, it gets where I'm running here, I'm going there, I'm going from lake to try to get this done, try to get that done. We're just trying to, you know, just trying to breathe, just trying to get a shower, getting a couple meals a day, and get back out to bass fish. It's a lot. I wouldn't trade it for the world, but it gets a little bit more hectic. So my apologies if I don't get the opportunity to reply back to your comment, but trust me, I try to review and look through some here and there when I can. But I do appreciate you guys commenting and sort of interacting and giving me an idea, because even in these scenarios where I'm asking you about stuff, it helps me sort of understand, like, oh wow, like I really like this hook, or I like that bait, or I like this, or I caught them in the grass like this. It's always like part of this deal. It's community, you know. We're all learning from each other, and that's really important. Sort of talking a little bit about the free rig aspect of this, I'm going to go and just, typically I really like it on pole docks. Now this lake in particular doesn't have a lot of pole docks. So dock stretches, flatter stretches like I have. The disadvantage to a free rig is you can't really pitch it underneath stuff. It doesn't skip pitch, or you can't cast under a dock. So again, that's why I like the vertical cover. So anywhere you'd have this, actually stretch right here doesn't show it, but there's docks down there. They're like flatter docks. There are poles on the docks. They're not like wooden. That would be a great stretch to look at. Any of those bluffy banks, let's actually slide up the two glue. So going up the two glue, getting up the way, maybe a little push out here past that. That's right here. And we could, a little bit steeper banks like this guy right here where that creek channel butts up against that. Good place to go ahead and pitch around the rock and those harder banks. In those areas, just like that. You know, the dominant cover in the lake is typically going to dominate. So if that means there's lay down trees or there's standing timber in your lake, that's going to be a great place to throw that for your rig. So that being said, I'm not going to go super in depth on that, you guys, but I do want to hear your thoughts on it. So jumping into the next on the lineup. Actually, I'm going to bring this guy. Hold on one second. Glide baits. If it's warming up in your neck of the woods, typically I would say I wait till March, but I do think if we get that warming trend, there will be a group of bass that tries to spawn the month of February here in the South. Okay. Apologies to my friends in Indianapolis, Indiana, because it's not happening for us. Keep with them blade baits and then the freeloader and a jerkbait. Don't try to don't try this at home. So, but for everybody in the South, we have warming trends. There will be groups in buck bass getting up shallower, and the adjacent areas, the steeper banks around those places, those biggest females of the year will spawn a lot of times in the month of February. Big ones, giant ones. And guess what's a great bait to catch big ones? Glide baits, right? So that being said, actually a couple years back, I caught some giant ones out here on Chickamauga on this bait right here, the Arashi glide. It's a really good wide gliding bait. This is an Arashi, and it glides really wide. So really, like if you're fishing down like flatter areas, like flats, like not as much target casting, like just gravel banks and flats and bars, a wider glide is going to draw them from further away. Okay, so you have longer, drawn out glides, allows that fish to come up there and see it and just draws them. It has more drawing power, I feel, as if it does. But where a choppier glide, like a DS Customs, like this guy right here, he's more of like a cover glide. So I'm using him for like around cover. So I'm using him around trees and docks. I can go chop, 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 chop. But there's times where they'll eat this better, they'll eat this better out offshore as well, or off the gravel points and stuff like that. Or there's times they'll eat this better. So like even I'll use this for a cover glide too, but it's a little bit different. If they want, you have to sort of figure out. It's sort of like I'll give you for instance for a glide bait scenario. It's sort of like throwing a Colorado blade versus a willow leaf. Like one, it's not as easy to sort of translate which ones they're going to eat as well. Like you typically throw a Colorado blade in dirtier water or a willow leaf's clear water. It's not as easy, but it's two different, completely different vibrations and actions. I'm trying to think if there has to be something better, a better analogy. But we're just going to say that for right now. I'm trying to, gosh, what would I say? It's like, because they're both the same profile. No. It's still like action. It's still like throwing a wigglewort versus like a, yeah, I could see that. It's like throwing a wigglewort versus a shatter out. Like one's subtler, like that long drawn out glides are more subtle, where like the choppier glides are a little bit more aggressive, if you will. So figuring out what the bass's mood is, like there's days that I'll kill them on this and won't catch them on Arashi. But there's also days that I won't get a bite on this. And then they'll commit to the longer drawn out glides. So this is something that I've learned over the years. And I'm not by no means a glide expert at all. But I do like to fish with a glide. I enjoy it. It's something that, like for me, I don't get to do it a lot in MLF and in every fish counts format. But when I come home, your boy's out there chucking a glide. So it just is what it is. Now, as far as rod goes, I don't really like a big giant rod. This is a 7.7 heavy 2-point. This is actually a Select Series rod, my signature series rod. I really like this rod for that. It's not a super heavy action heavy. It's got a good parabolic bend. It casts well. You can glide that bait around, and it locks up really well. You want that parabolic bend. You don't want a super, super heavy rod typically. For me, that is what I'm not really. I just want to make sure I have a little bit of that parabolic bend, which allows for that rod to really bend down the blank. And when that fish grabs it, I don't know if you guys can see that, but like it just sort of bends down that blank pretty well. I don't want it to go way down there, but like I want it to have a good parabolic bend, and I don't want a fast action. I want a moderate action, right? I want it to slowly taper, because you do have a pretty. I mean, even these baits are still pretty solid and heavy baits. As far as line goes, I'm going 20 to 25 pound fluorocarbon. Suffix advanced fluorocarbon is what I prefer. And then reels, I got a 6.2 to 1 gear ratio. I got an 8.5 gear on the gear ratio. I've not got that dialed in. I sort of just pick what reel I personally like. And I'm not going to really jump into the on the water side of this super much. I would just say, like, I'm going to show you just one, like maybe one place maybe. It's sort of like the same thing you would use when like when you throw a jerk bait, like some of those like little pushes. A lot of it, like a lot of the things is like contours. Okay, let me see here. Okay, I'll give it. It's actually not a bad place. So this point right here comes out. It's like 6 foot up on top. So I would just have my boat out here on like right here, and I'm casting up on top in like 3 foot of water, and I'm going down this bank, and it steepens up down the bank. That little transition right there would be a good place to throw a glide. Like mouth of a pocket, the males are back here starting to spawn, the females aren't quite there yet. And if you want to catch some of the biggest bass in the lake, big. Like, and that's more of my gliding around, like the longer glide, right? That's the Arashi that I'm going to use that because it's a bigger flat. Where maybe if there's some trees down this bank, that's when I'm going to pick up the choppier glide. It's fair enough. So that is the rundown on the glide baits. I want to hear also, like, if there's a couple glide baits, what are you guys hearing? What's the best glide baits out there? I want to hear what's some sneaky ones. You guys got to have something for me. Let me hear. Let me hear the best glides. I want to hear them. I have to show you guys my glide bait collection eventually. I got a lot of them. I mean, I'm not going to say I got all of them, but I got a lot. We'll go through it one day. So, next on the list, I will have to say this because I think it's so important. It's a bait that doesn't get talked about a ton, but is still so relevant. And that is a paddle tail swim bait. Like a paddle tail swim bait is a killer in the month of February. You can, especially when you get in or around, I mean, you can fish deep with it. You can fish shallow with it. You can fish around boat docks with it. It's just such a versatile bait, and I think that with the minnow craze, it's gotten a little bit slept on. It's not really talked about as much. This is one of my favorites, the 4-inch mare. Has a really tight, good wobble kick to it. And like when you're just fishing down banks, this was like the dominant technique for the last 10 years before that, right? Guess what? They still bite it. They're still eating it. But we just are, a lot of times you get on hype and you jump into something and you forget about something, and then all of a sudden somebody's behind a reel and that thing swimming, catch them. So don't sleep on a paddle tail swim bait this time of year. It is a great way to generate bites. And if you do not utilize forward fishing, or you're not that great at it, or you're trying to learn it, or you don't even use it, and you're just bank fishing, a paddle tail swim bait could be the best bait for you because you get a little bit of vibration, get a little bit of feedback. If the water's a little clean for a chatterbait, and you're in a clean water situation, this is a great technique to throw. From clear water to stained water, I'm talking about it from a foot of visibility to 20 foot of visibility. A paddle tail swim bait catches bass anywhere you go in the month of February, March, April, pretty much all year long. It does. It's just a great way to generate bites. You cast it, you wind it in, it just catches fish. Personally, my recommendation, depending on, like, you have to change your jig head accordingly to where you're fishing. If you're fishing deep, I'm going to suggest a 3/8 or a ½ ounce jig head, or 5/16. Fishing shallow, 3/16, eighth, quarter. That's sort of my preference, depending on, like, if I'm fishing, like, what I'm doing. If I'm fishing the Tennessee River, if I'm fishing a Highland Reservoir Lake, it all sort of just depends. Like, if I'm fishing a Highland Reservoir Lake, a lot of times I'm going to throw like a head like this, is a 1/4 ounce. This is that VMC. Same jig head I throw with the minnow is the same jig head I have right here. It's that VMC screw lock head. So the hybrid swim bait jig, it's a 1/4 ounce, that 4-inch mare. The thing I am going to change is color. If the water's pretty stained up, going to your more like your sight flashes and your pearls and some of those that have a little bit more contrast to them. If the water's cleaner, like a Pro Blue Red Pearl, like this guy right here. Like in between is the Sexy Shad. It's a great color for that water. Just a little off color, but not too clean. Great color for that. Of course, gizzard shad, can't go wrong with that because it just looks exactly like a shad. But the key with a swim bait is really taking your time and casting it out there, letting it hit the bottom, because you do have to realize every time you crank your reel, especially with a lighter jig head, that bait is rising. Okay, so your bait's rising. So when you actually get an understanding of what your bait does out there, with a swim bait, my retrieve is cast it out there, let it hit the bottom. Say I'm on a Highland Reservoir Lake and I'm fishing rocky banks and I'm sitting in 30 foot of water and I'm casting up there to 5. When it hits the bottom, I start to wind that bait. Wind it slow, slow. Get about halfway to the boat, I kill it. And I start winding it back. I get it back to the bottom, I start winding it again. That's typically, I want my bait to be closer to the bottom, especially if I feel like the fish are down that way. So really taking your time. The big key with that is selecting a swim bait that you know is kicking at the slow retrieve. Not all swim baits are created equal on that. That was something that was really important with this bait. I made sure that I could literally just pull this bait in my pool just like this along the water and it would kick. Because I wanted it to be like where you crawl that bait. It's like, doop. Because there's still fish that are on the bottom that are sitting down there, and when you wind that swim bait bomb, they just can't help it. So if the water's really clean, and 4-inch can be, this is what I have on here because we just came from Texas. I'll probably have a 4-inch tied on in Florida. But a 3-inch, 4-inch just depending on what, where you're at. And don't sleep on a 2.5-inch. That little small little mare. He's a bad little dude on them subtle little places. It's sort of getting slept on a little bit. I just don't want people to forget about the swimmer because it does catch them. And I think that you're going to see a little bit more starting to play that people are being a little quiet about. And there's some stuff, trust me, some guys are catching them on a swimmer. Don't forget about it. And then last but not least, before we jump into that, you guys, I sort of explained what a lot of the same stuff sort of applies with that swim bait. So I'm not going to go super far in depth right here on the screen, but I am going to jump into the last bait, which is a jerk bait. You got to have a jerk bait. It is what it is. It's this pre-spawn. Bass will bite a jerk bait, period, bar none. And a story, you got to have a jerk bait. This is a Maverick. For me, you just got to change the color depending on what you're using. 12-pound Suffix advanced fluorocarbon, 7:3 gear ratio reel typically. That's the STX. 6.8 is the new 6.8 jerkbait rod. But you're going to be really focusing on places that these fish are pre-spawning, similar to the place that I showed you guys where I was throwing the glide. Out there on that point that sort of transitioned to a steeper bank. That's the same kind of stuff that I'll throw a jerkbait on. Mouths of pockets, little secondary points, inside the creeks. Those are the places that I'm going to be looking at to try to catch the fish. And that's the subtler stuff. Like those little contour pushes was what I call sneakier kind of stuff. Like an obvious point, like everybody's going to roll up to a main lake point like that, right? Looks good, main lake point, looks great, absolutely. But the sneakier stuff is the little sides of the points. I mean, I'm telling you guys some goods. The sides of the points is the sneaky stuff. People go roll up on the point, cast, make some casts, but you slide over here and cast the point right there on that steep side, lock up. Like a lot of times they won't live on the point, they'll live on the side. So don't forget about that. I'm just saying, give you guys a little nugget there. And that's a wrap for top baits of the month of February. I try to give you guys something new every single time. I truly enjoy doing these videos because there's so many different anglers, from advanced anglers that watch these to beginner anglers that are just trying to learn and understand like the scenarios of what's going on. And it's all different. Like, look, the reason I keep these series going is because I enjoy them. And I learn from a lot of the comments. Like, I ask you guys questions, you reply back, and it's cool to sort of have that interaction and just free flow of conversational, open talk of what we think might be working and what the trends are for the weather. Being able to sit here in the month of February right now and look at the next 2 weeks of weather and say, man, it's going to be warm, and be able to select the baits and say, guess what? If you're in the South, these are the baits I would select that are true time. I mean, you can't, hopefully it makes an impact on your fishing this month. That's the goal. Hopefully you're catching a few more fish. Maybe you're making the right decision and you're figuring out, oh man, they're on the little pushes or they're doing this, and you're paying attention to little details that I'm showing you on like the C-map stuff. That's sort of the goal of this. And if it has helped you, it would obviously, it makes me feel good. It makes me feel good. Drop a comment. If this has helped you in any way, shape, or form, drop a comment, let me know. Because I do appreciate, I enjoy these videos. You can tell that when I'm talking about it, I love bass fishing. I love talking about lures. I love talking about trying to chase bass and figure out what they're doing. And it's a transition every single day, every week. There's something new happening. And there might be a bait in here that I didn't pick that would probably be the best bait this month. Who knows? But that's what's great about bass fishing. Not every bait selection is perfect. But going out there and doing something that you love is what it's all about. So thank you guys so much for watching, and we will see you on the next video.